way back when. I was thinking, chapter 18, take probably about 2 weeks to get through. I think it might take 3. I don't know if we're going to finish today. But a little quick review of what we went through last week. We started chapter 18 last week. And we get here kind of an introduction to a man named Obadiah. We talked a little bit about how Obadiah is actually a pretty common name. There's like 12 guys in the Bible named Obadiah. This is not the same Obadiah that wrote the book of Obadiah. So don't get too confused or kind of hung up on that. But we do get some information about him. He works under King Ahab. He's, your translations will say like chief administrator for his palace or manager of his house or servant of his house. He was somebody who had some status. He was a pretty important person in the administration of King Ahab, but unlike a lot of King Ahab and probably a lot of people working for him, he was still devoted to God, although it seems to be he was devoted in secret. He had hidden 100 prophets of God in 2 caves, and it kept them fed and watered, and we kind of, even though it's not said in Scripture, where did he get these supplies? Because there's a drought that's been going on. Where is he just picking this stuff up? It's probable that he's stealing it out of the palace storehouse. So right under the nose of Ahab and Jezebel. So if he got caught doing this, he's going to die. That's probably every indication that if he's caught doing this, he's going to die before he's found out that he's still devoted to God. Jezebel has every interest in taking him out. But he's been doing this, it seems to be in secret. And Elijah has been called to go back and meet Ahab after all this time. About 3.5 years have gone by since the drought started in chapter 17. And now God says, okay, Elijah, it's time to go back, go to Israel, go meet Ahab. But he runs into Obadiah first. And Obadiah and Ahab are looking for grass to feed their horses and their mules. Apparently they're either running low or don't have any left, and that's not a good situation to be in. But he meets Obadiah and he tells Obadiah, hey, I'm here to present myself to Ahab. Go to let him know this. And Obadiah wants nothing to do with this because in his mind, people have been searching for Elijah for years. Ahab's been sending people to hunt for him, not just in Israel, but outside of Israel. He says every nation, every kingdom, and he had not been found. But now here he is, and he's afraid if he goes away, gets Ahab and comes back, Elijah's not going to be there, and they're not going to find him. And then Ahab's going to punish Obadiah for this, probably a death sentence here. So he's not really into this idea, but we see Elijah kind of comfort him, specifically in verse 15. He says, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. Now, invoking the name of the Lord here is, of course, important to Obadiah because Obadiah is also a God-fearing man. So he understands what Elijah is saying is true. And so we got into a little bit of this meeting. We do have Obadiah going, fetching Ahab. Ahab comes back. He sees Elijah, and the first thing he says to him is that you, Elijah, troubler of Israel? And this seems like just flavor text almost, but this is actually an important thing to remember. Whenever Ahab sees Elijah, he always has the worst thing to say about Elijah, because this is going to come back later in a few chapters, so this is not just a fun thing to point out. This actually may be an indicator for some things later that will help us out in this study. So, but of course, Elijah throws it back at him and says, it's not me, it's you guys. You have abandoned the Lord. You've gone after the Baals. And so he proposes this contest. He says, bring all the people from Israel, all around Israel. Bring your 450 prophets of Baal, your 400 prophets of Asherah. Meet me at Mount Carmel. We're gonna settle this dispute. And Ahab goes ahead and does it. We wonder, why didn't Ahab just kill him there? He's been looking for this guy for years. He's here. Why not just finish the job? And I don't know exactly the answer to that. We don't get enough text to indicate why he did exactly this or didn't do what one would think he might do. But he does go through with what Elijah suggests. And Elijah calls out to the people at Mount Carmel. He says, how long are you going to waver between 2 opinions? If God is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. Stop doing this flip-flop thing. Don't be, confused or act like you don't know. We're going to settle this. And that's where we ended up leaving off last time, I think. Any other comments before we get into the absolute meat of this contest here?
Ahab, like so many people today, and especially in positions of power, he tries to act like, he's just one person. And Elijah
and we may not have necessarily chosen to follow that path. Sometimes we get into a situation like, oh, I'm the one up at bat, and I may not have wanted to put myself here, but the situation has called for me to, either lead or do something by example or whatever the situation may be. We don't want to shrink back from that, especially when God has called us to step up to the plate there, if you will. I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of baseball puns all of a sudden. Very good. I want to kind of back up a little bit. I know we read 21 through 24 last week, but I think it's a good setup for what we're about to go into. So we'll read it again, and then we'll kind of continue on after that. We won't spend too much time on it. But someone read for us verses 21 through 24, just for a moment here, and then we'll move on.
And Elijah came to all the people and said, How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Therefore let them give us 2 bulls, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other bull, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. So all the people answered and said, It is well spoken.
Okay, thank you. So I want to read this again so we get a very detailed picture in our mind about what is about to go down. So Elijah, and here's one of the things I wanted to point out also. Elijah says, I'm the only one left. Now, we know this is not the case. God is going to say so later. And we already know that Obadiah has had the 100 prophets that he's hidden in those caves. So he's not the only one, but he's the only one there apparently on Mount Carmel. So I don't know if he's necessarily referring to all the land, but he's the only one there at that time. He's the only prophet of God there. And he says, but there's these 450 prophets of Baal. So if you imagine any sporting contest, and I don't know why my mind is on sports right now, but if you had 2 teams and one team had 1 guy and the other team had 450, and they're all on the field at the same time, who do you think is going to win that contest? It doesn't seem very fair. And this is kind of one of the things I want to point out kind of over and over again through this, is that Elijah should be at a severe disadvantage here in every way. So when he overcomes, it's even greater than, if everything was fair and equal and God, barely nudged out. This is going to be even greater than that kind of an outcome. So just wanted to point that out. So we have 2 bulls. They're going to, prepare it, lay it down as an offering to their respective deities, their respective gods. And then they're not going to set fire to it, but they're going to call out to their God to send fire. And whichever God answers, that's the God, and that's the one we're going to follow. And the people say at the very end of what Buddy read here, what you say is good. They agree with the terms, and they're going to follow through with what Elijah says. And we will talk about whether or not they really do so, short term and long term. But this is the rules. Everyone is agreeing to it. Elijah, of course, is already at a big disadvantage. Just one guy versus 450 prophets of Baal. So just keep those things in mind as we continue through. Any quick comments or anything before we move on? I know we touched on this last week. I just want to set this up.
Notice that Elijah makes his proposal to the people, not to the prophets of Baal. I wonder sometimes if they would have accepted or not. You suppose that 450 prophets, some of them at least are sincere.
We don't see any object, at least, on this.
No, but they've never done anything like this before. So they're going to try to do something they've never really done before. They may have tales, legendary tales in their predecessors of the acts of Baal and things like that. I don't know, but this will be a first time for them, and they have to really be sincere and have a lot of faith in their God. But he makes it to the people, and once you make it to the people and they say, yes, that's a good idea, their backs are against the wall. They
Yeah.
have to put up or shut up. So.
And that's going to be kind of the same for King Ahab, too, is he's going to be kind of out of control of this situation for a while. We don't see him try to object or intervene really too much, but I don't think he would have been able to do so even if he wanted to, because all the people of Israel are there. What's he going to do about it? Because Elijah's going to make the truth very apparent here, and no one's going to be able to see, well, this was a trick or, some sleight of hand or, the wool's been over our eyes. Like, it's very plain to see what the outcome is going to be here. And you said, this is something that the prophets of Baal have never done. I don't get any notion that Elijah's ever done this before either. So, in fact, I don't think, correct, I mean, there's probably been similar instances. I'm thinking, some of the punishments of the children of Israel where fire would come down. But this would have not happened in this generation. So something that would have maybe happened long, long ago, but no one's ever seen this happen in their lifetime, if you will. Okay, very good. Let's continue on. Let's read the next section. Someone read for us verses 25 through 29, please.
Now Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one bull for yourselves and prepare it first, for you are many, and call on the name of your God and put no fire under it. So they took the bull which was given them, and they prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning even till noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, no one answered. Then they leaped about the altar which they had made. So it was at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he is busy, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they cried out aloud and cut themselves, as was their custom, with knives and lances until the blood gushed out on them. And then when midday was past, they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention.
Okay, so there's a lot of very interesting details. We won't probably get too deep into all of them, but certainly some of them I want to point out. We see here Elijah, again, kind of putting himself at a disadvantage. He gives the prophets of Baal first picks. So you pick the bull, you prepare it first, you get the first shot at this. Now, this may kind of seem like a minor thing, but I'm thinking, if I'm one of those top heads of the 450 prophets, I'm going to pick the better bull that I see between the two, since I get the choice. And, the better bull is going to, please the God that I serve more, so I'm going to pick that one. So in a way, Elijah is, again, sort of putting himself at a slight disadvantage here. There's not any major difference mentioned between the bulls. I don't presume there is much, but it's possible he's relinquishing this advantage. But Elijah's going to do kind of more of this. That's a lot more obvious later, so we can talk about that as we get to those. But several of these verses give us a pretty good idea as to how long this is taking. It says after, we have the prophets of Baal, they've prepared the bull, they prepared the altar, they've danced, they're shouting, they're calling on the name of Baal from morning until noon. Now, we don't know exactly what exact time in the morning they started. Was it at sunrise? Was it a little bit later? Did they all have a good breakfast beforehand? We don't know. We're not told that detailed information, but they went at least till noon. And so they've at least been going a few hours here, I imagine, maybe up to 6 possibly. Again, I'm not exactly sure. We're not told that information too deeply, but it's been hours probably. It's been a long time. And what's happening? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't know who would have the endurance to just keep going and going, but they're not done yet. No, this is just the start. Because Elijah seemingly has done nothing up to this point. Around noon, he decides to taunt them, or some of your translations may use a slightly different term, but I think I'm okay with that wording. He calls out to them and says, well, maybe you're God, and maybe he's in meditation, he's deep in thought, or maybe he's sleeping or traveling. Maybe you just need to shout louder because hours and hours of doing this has not been enough. Do more. It seems perhaps a little bit juvenile at first, but I think this is actually accomplishing a little bit more than just Elijah making fun of the prophets of Baal. Like, sure, that might be his main purpose here, but if you think about this, like, if what they're doing is not sufficient enough, like they have to do more to, wake their God up because he's not paying attention, doesn't that make their God seem a lot weaker? Because he's not omnipresent, he's not all-knowing or all-seeing. It really kind of diminishes Baal without them really being able to do anything about it. Either they give up and they lose, or they do what Elijah says and says, oh, yeah, we need to shout louder and wake him up or get his attention somehow. But by taking that suggestion, they're sort of admitting that he is not as great as we've made him out to be. He doesn't have this omnipresence or all-knowingness. Someone turn to Psalm 139 real quickly. Actually, I might read it because it's kind of a long passage that I want read. But you all can go over there and follow along. Psalm, 139. This is not a, let's see, one page over. I'm going to read from this. I'm going to read verses 1 through 16. And the point I want to make here is that, this is such a thing that, Baal is not able to, see everything, or is not always present, or not always attentive. This is in stark contrast with what we see discussed about God. And there are other places we could go to for this, but I think Psalm 139 makes this point very apparent. Of course, this is something that David wrote. Starting verse 1, it says, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. It goes on, but I'm going to stop there. I think I made the point. David is describing the character of God. What does he know? Everything. David admits, God, you know everything about me. You know my words and my thoughts even before they come to me. You know what they are. If I go any place, high, low, far away, you're already there. You're everywhere. There's nowhere I can go where you are not there. So this is a stark contrast that we see. Like, we have a Baal who needs to be awoken. He's traveling. He doesn't hear. He's not paying attention. And then Psalm 139, we have David describing God as being everywhere, knowing all things, perceiving our thoughts. Even before any of that comes to us, to our consciousness, he already knows what it's going to be. So that is a huge power difference between these two. I think that's a really interesting thing to point out. So it's not just Elijah taunting them, which I think that's part of it. But there also is a point there that this Baal, even if you've got to, work a little harder, that shows, Baal really isn't so great after all. And this goes on for basically the entire day. We get a little bit later there in what we read. The prophets of Baal have been, frantically calling out to Baal from the morning, whenever that was in the morning, but until the time of the evening sacrifice. But absolutely nothing has been happening. They've been slashing themselves. They've been bleeding out. They're crying. They're dancing. And they've done this all day. Nothing. So obviously the people of Israel are probably not very impressed by this, because it's not that the prophets of Baal aren't trying. It seems like they're trying. They've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, blood even, and nothing is coming of it. So it's been a total waste of everyone's day. I don't know if any of those Israelites had any plans for the day, if they were just going to hang out for an hour or two. But, they've been there all day. There's nothing going on. Any comments, questions up through verse 29 there? All right, we're about to see the opposite here in just a moment here. So I'm going to read for us 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 30 through 40, please.
Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain
Through 40, please.
And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, The Lord is God, the Lord, he is God. And Elijah said to them, Seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there.
Okay. So, interesting stuff is happening here as opposed to nothing happening. It's the time of the evening sacrifice. Like I've said, the prophets of Baal have been going all day. They've had all the time in the world, and they haven't produced any result at all. And Elijah decides that now it's time to take his turn. It's time for him to kind of show what's going to happen here, and kind of have this nonsense come to an end. He calls the people to him, so he gets their attention, and he has to actually rebuild. Apparently there was an altar to the Lord there, and he had to rebuild it, and he did it according to the law with the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And he does some additional work to this that would not have been required, but Elijah's being a little extra here. He digs a trench around it, and he prepares the bull, he puts the wood on the altar, puts the offering on there, and he gives instructions for water to be poured out on the wood and the offering. So just kind of imagine this. You've got a stone altar, but probably pretty big, 12 stones, some wood on top of that, the bull as the offering on top of that. He's built a trench around that altar, and now he says, we're going to pour some water on this. Now, we get some details about that. We have 4 jars of water. They're poured out on the altar, and he says, do it again. They do it again. He says, do it a 3rd time. They do it again, so that's 12 jars, if I've done my math. 12 jars worth of water has been poured out on this offering. Now, water is it's over everything. It's on the offering. It's on the wood. It's even gone down and filled up the trench that he dug up. So it's all full of water. Everything has been doused. And this is a very plain example, the probably most obvious, of Elijah putting himself at what should be a disadvantage. Because, and you know how pyrotechnics work. If you have something that's dry and something that's wet, the dry item is going to burn a lot faster and easier than the wet item. In fact, it's going to be very hard to burn wood that has been dumped and doused and submerged in water. It's nearly impossible. So he's put himself, it seems that like this would be a bad idea. You're wanting to set fire to this. Well, you put water all over it, Elijah. This is going to be pretty hard now. That's kind of the point here, is Elijah's consistently making it what would seem harder and harder for this to happen, which when it comes through, makes it even more miraculous, I think. So there's a little question I want to address real quick, and I think I got enough time to do it, about the water itself. Now, they've been in a drought for 3.5 years. So the question comes up, where are they getting all this water from? Like they had apparently 4 jars there ready to go, and he said, do it again, do it a 3rd time. So they've dumped out a significant amount of water. So where did this water come from? Any thoughts? I've got a couple, but... Well, we know that the brook that he had been on the other side of Israel had, so we don't know. We're not given that detail.
I mean, that's where he took the prophets of Baal to slaughter.
Yeah, so it would have been nearby.
And so that's a possibility.
Yeah, we don't know if it was dried up or not. Let me give you a couple of ideas. The first one is basing stuff on stuff we don't really know for sure. I mean, we have people from all over Israel, including King Ahab, these prophets that they've been state sponsoring, if you will. They probably have some water with them as provisions. Now, I don't know if the people would be willing to give up that water to do this little fun thing that Elijah's doing. I don't know how they would get into that mindset. But they probably did have some water with them. We know there's been drought, but surely they had cisterns that had water in them before this time. They may be digging deep wells, getting groundwater. Now, those sources will eventually be used up also, but we don't know what the condition of those are. I kind of think of, back in California, there's been years of drought for a long, long time. If you have a well, like you can bring up a lot of water and you'll be okay, but to irrigate your crops, that becomes another matter, because if you start using all that water on your food, well, you're going to use up what little water you have, but then if you don't use it to grow food, then you're not going to have food. So eventually, no matter what you do, you can dig the deepest wells, eventually that groundwater source will go dry. So it's not clear. The other thing I want to point out as maybe a possibility is considering the location of Mount Carmel, it's just a few miles away from the Mediterranean Sea. Now, we're not told what kind of water this was, whether it was seawater or fresh water. But if they wanted to, they probably could have sent a few guys down, fill up those jars, and bring them back up within not too long. I don't know. We're not told that's what they did. We don't have a lot of information here. The point I want to make is it's not an impossible thing for this to happen. Because I can see there's some objectors that say, well, there's been drought for 3.5 years. They wouldn't have this water. Surely the Bible cannot be true. But I don't think that's the case. I think we just don't have a lot of information about this water source. There are water sources there. Jeff mentioned the brook that was probably nearby in the valley. Kishon, we have the Mediterranean Sea just a couple miles away. They may have brought their own water. I imagine, especially with King Ahab being there was water present. I mean, he was planning on going probably back to Samaria at some point. He's going to need water for the journey. We don't know. We're not given that detail. But the point I want to bring up is this is not an impossibility. It's just we don't know exactly how they did it. I think those are two different things. I think that's all I have to say about the water itself. So finally, in verses 36 and 37, we have Elijah calling on God. He gives a prayer. It's pretty short, pretty simple. Like, God, answer me, show the people who you are. And suddenly fire comes from heaven. He hasn't been dancing around. He hasn't been slashing himself with swords. He hasn't been at it for hours. It seems like it happens pretty instantaneously. As soon as he's finished praying, immediately, verse 38, the following verse, the Lord sends down fire from heaven on the offering, and it doesn't just burn up the offering and the wood. The description here is it burns up the offering, the wood, but also the stones, the soil or the dust in the area, and then also the water, including the water that has been filled in the trench, has all been dried up. The whole thing is gone, which is impossible. Like, there's no way that, if Elijah was trying to sneak a match in there, that this would happen. First of all, it's all covered in water. It would never light. But even if he did light it, it would not make the stones disappear, would not get rid of all the water. There's no way that would happen. This is truly, very obviously, a miraculous thing. And I think the people who are there, who are witnesses to this, recognize that. And they say, well, this is not something that any man could do. Only this could have been an act of God. And we use that phrase for disasters and stuff. But this is really something supernatural. There's nothing natural about this. This is far greater than anything that could have happened in any normal means or any natural means. So the people obviously see that Elijah's the winning team here. The guy in the one team instead of the 450 wins. And the people are now on his side. They say, the Lord is God, the Lord, he is God. And, Baal, of course, has done nothing this whole time. So and we've talked about King Ahab already. He hasn't really interceded, but we'll probably have to get to him next week. There'll be a small part of this chapter we'll get to next week that does involve him. But the people sees the prophets of Baal. Elijah calls out, seize them, don't let them escape, and then they're all slaughtered. Every single one of these 450 prophets of Baal die that day. And this is going to be something that Jezebel especially is not happy about. We're going to see this later on. Again, we won't get to it this week. We're almost out of time. But kind of remember this, that not just the prophets of Baal lost this contest, but they were all killed. They were all slaughtered by the people at the direction of Elijah. And one other thing I wanted to bring up before we kind of finish out, and maybe you all might have some thoughts about this. I want to talk about the prophets of Asherah, which maybe some of you may have forgotten. If you remember back to verse 19, which I know is from last week, we didn't read that today. But if you go back to verse 19, Elijah, when he's asking King Ahab to summon all these people to Mount Carmel, he includes to summon not just the 450 prophets of Baal, but also the 400 prophets of Asherah he has there. Now, if you look later on in this story about what's going on Mount Carmel, we only see the prophets of Baal mentioned here. You look at verse 22, 23, 25, 40, it all says prophets of Baal. It never says the prophets of Asherah here. Now, what's going on? Where are these 400 prophets of Asherah? They were mentioned back in verse 19. Why are they not mentioned here on Mount Carmel? Now, I have two possibilities about this. One is they may have been around, but they weren't doing anything. They were standing back, just kind of watching, or they weren't there at all. It's possible that King Ahab didn't actually take all of them. It's possible he just took the prophets of Baal and not the prophets of Asherah. We're not told. Again, it's one of these things where some might say, well, the Bible can't be right because there's an inconsistency here. No, we're just not given that specific information. That's not an inconsistency. So it's possible, they were just standing back and not doing anything, or they were not there to begin with. King Ahab did not make them go. He just made the 450 prophets of Baal go. If you look specifically in verse 22, where Elijah calls out the number of him versus his opponents, he says, I am the one prophet of God. It says, these are the 450 prophets of Baal. He doesn't point out, 950 prophets. He just points out 450. So my suspicion is that the 400 prophets of Asherah did not go to Mount Carmel. We don't know for sure, but it doesn't seem that they were at all involved in the contest. Otherwise, I'm sure Elijah would have mentioned a bigger number than 450. We don't see them seized by name or killed by the people at the end of verse 40 there. None of that seems to happen. So I wanted to call that out because some people might say, well, verse 19 says there should be 400 prophets of Asherah, but we don't see them anywhere in there. It's just information we don't have. And this is something that's going to come along a few times, even more so when we get to chapter 19 and kind of onward. And actually, probably later in this chapter, there's going to be a few things I want to talk about, but we won't get to today. We're just about out of time. Any comments, questions up through verse 40? I'm gonna pause there because verse 41 kind of turns to another. I mean, it's kind of all happening at once, but it's kind of a new topic there on Mount Carmel. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Go ahead.
They slaughtered all these people. I mean, did God tell them to do this somewhere? Or was it sort of given that that's what you do?
So there are a few instructions. I mean, if you have someone who is serving a false god, there's a death penalty for that, because one of the things in the Ten Commandments is you will serve me and me only. You'll not have any false gods aside from me. And then, of course, there's the rules about prophets. If there's something that a prophet says and it doesn't come to be, then he is a false prophet and needs to be killed. So yes, there would be directives for that. So this is not just Elijah going rogue here and saying we need to kill all these guys. This would be in line with the directives from God to do this. There's probably, and I'd have to look them up because I don't have them in my notes, but they're definitely in there. I could look those up for you if you'd like. Yeah. So this is not a once-off thing where there's someone serving a false god or a false prophet of some kind, and God either through his prior commandments or through a direct order at that moment has that person die. This is not an uncommon thing. So yeah, this is in line with what God would ask for them to do. Yeah, it wouldn't have been like, just someone who got caught up in it and didn't know what they were doing. These are described, if you go back to the early verses we read from last week, these 450 prophets of Baal were prophets of Baal who served in probably the temple in Samaria that Ahab built. to Baal, and it says they dine at Jezebel's table. So not only are they probably serving in this capacity, but they're also getting a benefit from it. Like, this is their job. It's not just something they do on the side or something they don't really understand. This is their main focus. So yeah, absolutely. I don't get any impression that, they were just ignorant, didn't know what, well, I guess they were ignorant. It was not some innocent mistake. I'll always say it that way. That's probably a better way of wording that. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, this is a good place to stop. I'm not going to try to push on and finish this chapter. I didn't expect to. But we're going to finish up next week. Next week we'll start in verse 41. It's just a short piece, but there's a lot of important details I do want to go. And we'll probably start chapter 19 next week. So if you want to get ahead on the reading end, you probably want to read through chapter 19, because I'm pretty sure we'll start chapter 19 next week. All right, thank you.